Today, our TED Talk is over a book called 100 Names for Love, A Stroke, a Marriage, and the Language of Healing. This is a nonfiction book by Diane Ackerman. She uses the passion for language with her brain sciences in reference to her husband Paul West having a stroke. They are both writers and their main connection is the language. And Paul West loses his ability to talk to a language paralysis known as aphasia. The main connection between the couple is language, and losing it affects their marriage in many ways. Ackerman goes through the entire recovery process of her husband, and this is a tragic event putting their marriage to the test. Ackerman tends to put an emphasis on how important it was to stick by her husband's side and not to lose hope, no matter how hard it got to be throughout the book. With the use of flashbacks, she contrasted how life used to be for them versus how it became after the stroke. Eventually, with all the ups and downs, Paul does start to recover after a long time of perseverance and hope. The story goes back and forth from explanations of the medical condition to their life experience.
This book is a masterpiece as it not only encompasses the scientific explanation behind aphasia and how to recover, but presents an inspiring love story. The facts behind aphasia personally are quite interesting to me, yet it was the day-to-day account of their love story that drew me in. My feelings for this book can be described perfectly by Abraham Verghese in the New York Times Book Review, as he says, "This book has done what no other has for me in recent years. It has renewed my faith in the redemptive power of love, the need to give it and get it, unstingingly to hold nothing back, settle for nothing less, because when flesh and being and even life fall away, love endures." This book is highly relatable because a lot of people experience this in a loved one at some point in their lives. The loved one is no longer themselves due to brain damage or psychological diseases. I always wondered what I would do if I had to put myself in their shoes. I wonder what it is like to no longer recognize the loved one. There is a choice that the loved one has to make, a choice to remain by that person through sickness and in health, which means being by that person's side even if they don't give you what they used to. Diane describes her journey in the decision-making process to choose to move forward. She starts by saying that she struggles with the idea that she has lost a loved one. In the beginning, she struggles with the idea that she has lost the love of her life. Because the main thing that connected them was their love language, everything seemed to be gone. They would chat about their books in the works, books they had read, and even made up their own dictionary of words and also nicknames for each other, as referenced in the title, 100 Names for Love. After the stroke, Paul loses most of his identity because writing was his life and their story. She also talks about how she lost her comforter. She becomes the only caregiver in the relationship responsible for his recovery. She also talks about how she has a hard time because the recovery process is very slow and the efforts to aid him become more exhausting and difficult. On the other hand, Paul experiences more different and painful difficulties as well. He knew what he wanted to be for her, but he just couldn't because he couldn't even get the words out. But there's a point in the book where Diane tells herself that she will not stop until he recovers. She knows that he is intelligent and that there is a bright future ahead. She accepts the fact that their past history is gone, but she decides to build a new relationship and accept him for where he is at. She doesn't give up on him and pushes him, and that leads him to eventually recover in the end.
Another thing I found interesting was the lessons learned by Diane through the recovery process and the creative techniques she made up for Paul's recovery to suit his personality and his way of thinking. Number 1, immersion training. She stopped doing the basic speech therapy every week and decided to engage him in non-stop conversation, and through that conversation repeating the words he wasn't familiar with or that he needed help with. Number 2, communication partners. She brought forth people that Paul trusted and felt comfortable with to start engaging in social conversation again. Number 3, appreciation and humor. Instead of laughing at him when he would say things that would make absolutely no sense, she laughed with him. It no longer was a discouragement, but a new kind of humor they embraced in their lives. Number 4, ignoring times tables. She didn't care how long the process would take because he would always be learning, so she ignored what the doctor said about the essential first post-stroke months were the only window for growth. Number 5, building a bridge to before. Even though he didn't write the same, she still encouraged him to keep writing and build up the skill again. Number 6, she encouraged creativity and tested him with brain exercises whenever she could. Number 7, living more in the present.
As Diane tells her story of perseverance, she conveys the argument to others that it is always possible to recover and restore what was once lost through determination and creating new beginnings.
Aphasia. Aphasia is a stroke that affects the left hemisphere of the brain. The left hemisphere of the brain is responsible for putting words together, understanding speech, making complete sentences, and is also responsible for grammar and language. Victims of aphasia may experience a disrupt in their ability to use language in ordinary circumstances, and also may have difficulty communicating in daily activities like at home, work, or at social situations. Some aphasia victims have recorded that they know that people are speaking to them but cannot respond properly. They also can follow the melody of a sentence, so they can differentiate between the tone of someone's voice when they're asking a question, making a statement, or even expressing strong feelings like anger or love. They also have a great difficulty understanding specific words. There are 2 different types of aphasia. There is Wernicke's aphasia, which is where they have a serious difficulty with comprehension. They often speak gibberish but do not realize what they are saying. For example, they might mean one thing, like a spoon, but they'll say something completely different, like gobble. Another type of aphasia is the Broca's aphasia. Broca's aphasia victims usually have a difficulty to form complete sentences. They may leave out basic words, for example, like this and is. They also may have a difficulty in understanding sentences. How aphasia affected the husband and the story as a whole. In the beginning, Paul spoke gibberish, which is found on page 99. When the doctors were asking him questions, Paul responded with the word mem, which is not a word that exists in the English language. It was also hard for him to put words together, and that resulted in him talking in incomplete sentences. Although I have never dealt with someone who had an aphasia or a stroke, I have dealt with a loved one impacted by a brain disease. She was my aunt, and she had 2 kids that are my age and 1 kid who's now in college. One day while she was out doing chores, she fainted in the parking lot. She was immediately rushed to the hospital, where the doctors found a cerebral aneurysm, which is a ballooning of a blood vessel found in her brain, which impacted her brain, and she could not perform anything at all, and she was unresponsive. A couple days later, she unfortunately passed away. Although she wasn't affected by stroke, her disease has impacted everyone around her. It made it difficult for her kids and family, and it was very hard to cope with. Thankfully, she has a loving family that took care of her kids and her husband and helped them all throughout the process of transitioning into a new life without her. I can relate to this book because I understand how difficult it was for Diane to unexpectedly cope with such a drastic difference in her everyday life.
I also have a personal experience with this because my uncle got in a car accident a few years back and his brain was severely damaged. But through speech therapy and everything, he's pretty much fully recovered, but he does definitely have a hard time putting sentences together, and sometimes he stutters. It has changed our family because we don't really recognize him as much anymore, but we learn to accept it and we overcome it.
I've never had to deal with anyone who's had a stroke, but one of my best friends has epilepsy. She's having them at the most unexpected times. It affects her family because they have to constantly know exactly what to do and when to do it, and we all overlook it, being really close to her and everything.
Was Diane's
Blooper number 1!
and through the rubber roulette. She stopped doing the basic speech therapy every week, and she said she started.
The left hemisphere of the brain is responsible.
Really?
Some aphasia students. Okay, just like cut that.
Process to choose to move forward. She starts by saying that she struggles with the idea that she has lost a loved one. Oh gosh.